my name's Jackson, and today I'm going to be talking about anthrax. So before I researched for this presentation, when I heard the word anthrax, the only thing that popped in my head was terrorist attacks and biological warfare. I remember when I was younger hearing about the 9/11 attacks and how shortly after, letters containing anthrax were mailed throughout the US. So on that note, let's start there. The 2001 anthrax attack. This attack happened right after 9/11, and it was where terrorists mailed letters containing anthrax to people in the media and in Congress all throughout the United States. Inside these letters, each contained arsenal anthrax, a form of anthrax that is in a very high quantity and very finely milled so it can float in the air and be inhaled by everyone around. In this attack, 17 people became critically ill and 5 died. Alright, so what is anthrax exactly? Anthrax, its scientific name for the bacteria is Bacillus anthracis, and it is a gram-positive rod-shaped bacteria. It's a bacteria that is found primarily in soil. Inside the soil, the bacteria produces a spore that has the ability to lie dormant for up to decades. And when the spore is eaten and taken in by livestock, such as cattle, goats, sheep, all those good things, it then germinates and begins to multiply within the host and infecting it, and then eventually leading to its death. Primarily infects livestock and animals. However, on the rare occasion it does affect a human, it is through the human coming in contact with animals that have been contaminated. And thankfully, it's not contagious. It can't be passed from one human to another human. And for the most part, humans are very resistant to it. So in very unlikely cases, it does. Humans do get infected. Right. What is the history of anthrax? Anthrax dates back to 700 BC, a time of ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia. The Roman poet Virgil, he even wrote about anthrax in some of his books. He talked about a plague sweeping through Rome and killing all the livestock. Then, for the next couple thousand years, really anthrax kept doing its thing. Animals were dying, people didn't really do anything about it, up until the 1800s. In the 1800s, scientists and doctors started to seriously look into anthrax and what's causing it. And that's when they discovered the morphology, the gram-positive rod, bacteria, all that. And then it wasn't until Robert Cox in 1877, he came along and he used anthrax in his experiment that famously became known for his Cox postulates. It's the experiment that he used to prove those postulates. And then, 1881, Louis Pasteur, the chemist, he came along and he created anthrax vaccine for animals. And this, as you can imagine, was very helpful because it saved tons of animals' lives, saved people money, all that good stuff. And then, 1950, finally they came up with the anthrax vaccine for humans. Alright, there are 3 types of anthrax. There is cutaneous, inhalational, and gastrointestinal. Cutaneous anthrax makes up about 95% of the anthrax cases. This form of anthrax can be acquired through cuts in the skin, abrasions, burns, where the spore finds its way into the body, creating lesions, which eventually turn into ulcers, which turn necrotic, and then, can produce flu-like symptoms and can even lead to death in about 20% of the cases. And then we have inhalational anthrax. Inhalational anthrax makes up roughly 5% of the cases. This form of anthrax is acquired through breathing in anthrax that's become airborne, and the symptoms are that it leads to flu-like symptoms, breathing problems, meningitis, shock, and then coma, and then eventually death. In 80% of the cases, people die even with antibiotic therapy. And without antibiotic therapy, it is almost 100% fatality rate. And then lastly, we have gastrointestinal anthrax. And this makes up less than 1% of anthrax cases. It is acquired through eating contaminated animals, and it leads to very upset stomach, vomiting, bloody diarrhea, difficulty swallowing, loss of appetite, and in 50% of the cases, it leads to death. All right, here we have a picture of cutaneous anthrax. This is the red, the black coal-like lesion ulcer that the cutaneous anthrax creates. All right, anthrax and bioterrorism. So within the last 100 years, anthrax has been engineered by chemists and scientists into a weapon for warfare, really. They've taken anthrax and engineered it in a way that magnifies and amplifies its most deadly characteristics. Those characteristics being its ability to be inhaled in large enough quantities to cause death, as well as its ability to remain airborne. They use a process that mills the spores very finely, creating a very, very fine powder that then can be released into the air and stay airborne for some time. There have been numerous cases throughout the last 100 years. The three primary ones are World War I. It's the first time it was used. It was used by the Germans against their enemies to kill the enemy's livestock. In Japan, the Japanese actually used it on their own people, one of their own provinces, to test the airborne effect of anthrax. And then, of course, 2001, anthrax attacks, which we already talked about. Okay. So how do you diagnose and treat anthrax? To diagnose anthrax, it requires laboratory testing, and it requires you to take a patient's blood sample, skin graft, or saliva. And then from these three, you can take a culture and see what kind of bacteria show up. And if anthrax is there, then there you go, you have anthrax. All right, treatment. The only treatment known is antibiotics, and there are three primary antibiotics. That is, we have doxycycline, penicillin, and ciprofloxacin. Aside from antibiotics, there is supportive therapy, and this is really just to monitor the breathing, monitor the fluid balance, electrolyte balance, look for shock, check the airway, that sort of thing. And then finally, what are the current concerns and the current discoveries surrounding anthrax? One of the growing concerns is actually has to do with the anthrax vaccine. Ever since 2001, the U.S. military have been required to be vaccinated for anthrax. And really since then, military veterans and just people still active duty, they have complained that since the vaccine, they have had all kinds of health side effects, such as joint pain, arthritis, fevers, headaches, migraines, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, hypogonadism, numerous other health effects as well. So this is just one of the current concerns that is still ongoing and still trying to decide whether or not the vaccine really does cause these or what. And then lastly, an exciting discovery. And to really end on a good note, this just highlights how anthrax isn't all bad. It doesn't just kill people. It's not only used by terrorists. There's actually a study I read by the International Journal of Cancer. It came out in 2019. They showed that anthrax has the ability to cure bladder cancer. In their research, they injected anthrax into an infected bladder, and it killed the cancer cells, but didn't kill the bladder cells, didn't harm the bladder cells at all. All right, there you go. That is anthrax. Thank you for listening, and hope you have a great day.